Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the actual Halloween special for the channel. Yeah, this is 2 weeks late. I mean, I say it's the actual Halloween special, but it's just a bad movie I watched. I kind of wanted to talk about it, so let's just fucking get into it. This beer is clear, or almost clear. It's kind of fucking wigging me out. For those of you who are curious, is Wild Ohio tea beer. This is beer that is brewed with tea instead of hops. So it's, it doesn't have that, like, heavy on the oats, heavy on the hops kind of flavor going on. Either way, this is a review on a movie that has been on my watch list for a very long time. And, this has been on my watch list pretty much ever since I was a kid, and I saw the VHS in the video store at like Hollywood Video or something like that, and I remember seeing it and thinking, man, this looks really cool, I kind of want to rent this, but my parents wouldn't let me rent horror films. At least not at that age. So I never got to see it. Here we are now, many years later, and I'm finally watching it. The film I'm talking about is Jack-O. This is a movie. Also, I should mention the title screen of this film says Jack-O-Lantern. The main villain is referred to as Jack the Pumpkin Man, Pumpkin Jack, Jack-O-Lantern, and Jacko. So there's a lot of shit going on. Essentially, this is your kind of classic setup of a Halloween horror film. Basically, Halloween night, something's going down, there's some kind of evil monster, or, people are getting killed left and right, and it's up to somebody to save the day. This film has to do with a family who, they're essentially connected to this supposed witch, who was portrayed by the late John Carradine. Keep in mind, this movie came out in 1994, John Carradine died in 88. His scenes for this movie were shot in 1985 on what looks like a VHS camera. And also, Cameron Mitchell is in this film. I don't really know what he was in. I'm sure he was in something very big and important because he's an iconic name. I've definitely heard the name before. But Cameron Mitchell was also in this. Again, a cameo that was recorded before his death. John Carradine's cameo seems to be just something that they randomly had lying around, and they were like, hey, let's use it in this. So it's only in the close-up shots of his character that you actually see John Carradine's face. Anyway, this movie has to do with this family who ended up, in the 1800s or whatever, ended up lynching John Carradine, who was a wizard or witch or warlock. They end up lynching him. And he puts a curse on them, saying, he'll raise some demon to kill them. And basically, it's kind of like Pumpkinhead, except this is not, and nowhere near as good as Pumpkinhead. Where to start the acting? The acting in this film is god awful. Honestly, nobody turns in a good performance, not even Linnea Quigley. I mean, she's fine, I like Linnea Quigley. Who doesn't like Linnea Quigley? To be honest, she's good. Not necessarily good, but, when she's in a movie, it kind of uplifts the experience a bit. And she's alright. She's alright in this movie. She doesn't really make it the best movie ever, but she's definitely a plus. Despite the cast being bad, they aren't unwatchably or ungodly awful. I've definitely seen worse seasonal horror films. I would probably have to say Jack-O-Lantern is a worse seasonal horror film, because that film just feels kind of like a cheap, sleazy slasher film shot on like 16mm or whatever. This movie feels like something that was conceived and it was gonna be shot on like 8mm or shot on video, and then they suddenly got the budget to shoot on 35, so they shot it on 35. That's what this feels like. It feels like a very, like the basic script and outline of the story feels like something it kind of feels like an R-rated Goosebumps almost, you know, because like yeah, there's some tits and there's some violence, there's a decent amount of violence in the film, but like it almost feels like something that if you were to like cut down the violence, this would be a good kind of creepy seasonal and the tits, mind you, seasonal flick to watch with your kids, very similar to like I want to say like Halloween Town or maybe uh, maybe Goosebumps, Night of the Jack-o'-lanterns, or Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns, whichever one that was. That was a good one. Uh, but either way, you know, this movie feels very cheap in every way, despite it having a relatively decent budget for it being low budget, and despite it being shot on 35 millimeter, this looks and feels like something that was more that was supposed to be shot on like I want to say 8 millimeter, maybe 16 at best. Um, this film is cheap as hell, and that's just kind of something I want to hammer in here. Is that this film is fucking cheap looking. Uh, the monster effects for Jacko himself are bad. It's literally just a guy in a cheap costume with a glowing pumpkin head, but it's kind of endearing and charming in the sense that it's like kind of a classic look. You know, the killer like scarecrow with a pumpkin head, or it's just somebody with a pumpkin for a head. You know, it's a classic look. It's something that you see a lot in seasonal horror films, or seasonal kind of media. You know, and I love that stuff. I love it. Shit, I don't know what else to say. This film is just so it's really bad. Like it is really bad. But I feel like this is something that I could watch with my family, like my immediate family. You know, I feel like I could watch this with my sisters and my parents, and they would completely be into it and completely just not give a shit that it feels cheap, and they would just sit and have a good time with it. Not much happens in this movie. Not much horror oriented happens until I want to say like 40 to 50 minutes in. I know that's kind of pushing it because there are some things that happen. There are some deaths that happen before then, but that's where it really starts to feel like an immediate threat to the characters is in that 40 to 50 minute mark. You know, other than that, it's basically just this movie where this kid is just like, yeah, I'm having nightmares about John Carradine and pumpkin-headed monsters. Mom, Dad, can you help? And then his parents are acting goofy, and his dad's dressed as Dracula. Like, I like one of the things I always remember when hearing about this movie is years ago in a VHS group I was in, some guy was talking about how he had just scored a copy of Jacko and he was going to watch it that night. And somebody said, you know, somebody commented like, dude, you better light up a joint because this movie requires you to be stoned. And like a bunch of people replied to that comment saying pretty much the same thing, like, yeah, I only watch Jacko when I'm drunk or high. And I've got to admit, I did, you know, have a few drinks. I'm going for the can, but it's empty. I did have a few drinks before, well, not before watching this, but like 30 minutes in, I did have a few drinks, and I got a little tipsy. It's a very cheap movie, and if you're somebody who doesn't like their time wasted on mediocre or just okay movies, then this is definitely not something for you. But if you are somebody who's a connoisseur of trash cinema, a connoisseur of bad movies, I wouldn't say you owe it to yourself to watch this, but I would definitely recommend it as a good seasonal watch. This definitely isn't going to be something I watch every year around Halloween, because every year around Halloween I always watch, you know, Halloween 3, Halloween, in the first two Halloween movies, and you know, occasionally something else like Hack-O-Lantern. This isn't gonna be one of those ones that I feel like I'm gonna watch maybe every couple of years, maybe every 2 to 3 years. You know, this movie isn't the end-all be-all of amazing seasonal direct-to-video horror, but I really enjoy it. I really enjoyed this film either way, and I really don't know whether to recommend it or not, because this film is just so average and cheap feeling and mediocre that simultaneously I was like, man, I've seen this plot done before, but at the same time I was just like, man, this kid's bad acting is hilarious. Let's keep watching. Maybe I'll see Linnea Quigley's tits. You don't get to see Linnea Quigley's tits. Spoiler alert. There's only like one pair of tits you see in this movie, and it isn't Linnea Quigley, which is automatically just a disappointment. You get Linnea in your fucking movie, and you don't get her to show her tits. Like, why'd you even get her? I mean, I guess it's because, you know, she's a scream queen. She's iconic, at least amongst cult film fans. Now I'm starting to ramble. Either way, what I say about the gore effects are alright too. This is a fucking mess. I already hate this review. On the gore meter from 1 to 10, 1 being something like Nosferatu, and 10 being something like Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. I'm sorry if I'm messing with this shirt a lot. This is a baseball tee that I bought from Fright Rags, and I don't think I've ever worn like an actual baseball tee like this, so it feels weird, because I feel like I'm not wearing anything on my shoulders, but I obviously am. I hate this review. I'm not doing another take. I'm not. I'm too lazy to do another take. On the gore meter from 1 to 10, 1 makes something like Nosferatu, 10 makes something like Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. Jacko is probably, I want to say, maybe a 3, maybe 3.5, maybe a 4, almost. It's not necessarily a gore fest. Like, it's mainly just stabbings and like some blood here and there. There's a couple throats that are slit, but that doesn't mean it's not, and the effects are very, very cheap, but that does not mean it isn't graphic. It's like I've said before about about graphic violence in a film. Even if the effects are cheesy, you still have to take the violence somewhat seriously. But yeah, this is the 2 weeks late Halloween special. And when I say 2 weeks late Halloween special, I just mean this is a review of a Halloween horror film that I'm doing in November, because I've lost all control of my life and I've become an alcoholic. Anyway, guys, this is Biscuit Boo Horror Reviews, signing off. Peace.